In my mind, there's hardly any really clear desire or hope left.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, this is the fourth and final analysis on Thomas Crooks. This time, instead of focusing on the problems, the underlying kind of issues, we want to look at solutions. And so we are going to look specifically at resilience, finding the glue to keep from coming unstuck. It's basically a recipe for happiness, an unusual topic, certainly for the sort of negative landscape of true crime. But I think what a necessary conversation. So what is the road back to happiness? If you find yourself broken, depressed, in a hole, scraping the bottom of a barrel, well, the goal should be resilience first. And by the way, throughout our lives, we are going to find ourselves repeatedly in situations of brokenness, in situations of devastation, in situations of heartbreak and disappointment. And so, how do we find ourselves? How do we find our way back from those places? And I can tell you, through the course of my life, I've been surprised at how often I've had to reinvent my life. I went through a phase where I was a writer. I still consider myself a writer, but there were other phases as well where I was an Ironman triathlete. And so we should expect to go through different phases of inventing, of creating who we are, right? And so what can be needs to be unburdened by what was, right? And so with that perspective, instead of going after happiness, happiness will find its way to you. Happiness is a strange thing. When you pursue it, it seems to elude you. And just when you think you've grasped it, it slips through your hands like water or sand. No, far better to achieve resilience and even independence, which is almost the same thing. And then happiness will come looking for you. So
how do we do it?
Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this kind of psychological analysis, you might also enjoy Van Gogh Letters on the Team Peachtree channel. It is really a fascinating journey into psychological resilience. Really good, something I would really recommend. The other thing that I think is perhaps maybe of some use to you is the deep dive series I've done on Rex Heuermann, where we sort of interrogate similar issues. I've got one left to do. I thought I would do it today. I might do it a little bit later this week on perversion, so look out for that. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. Bear in mind, I don't do live streams, so if you want to show your appreciation, I would appreciate it. You can hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So let's examine again Crooks' situation and begin by identifying what was wrong with him before we find solutions to right living. And he's quite a good example where you can look at him and see what's wrong and then say, would this have worked in his life? So Crooks was reportedly on decent terms with his family, but he didn't seem to spend much time with them, which suggests that there was strife in the household. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment. Whatever was going on with Crooks wasn't only going on at school. Probably if things weren't going very well, he was worsening it, compounding the situation, perhaps by spending a lot of time looking at pornography or withdrawing into himself. And I don't know if he was playing computer games, but certainly there's a constructive way to respond to a negative situation. There's also a destructive way of responding. And so I do think that his home situation couldn't have been that good either. At 20 years of age, he was still living with his parents. A move could have made matters worse, true, but equally, it could have made matters better. If you're in a bad situation, if you're broken, if you're depressed, what really needs to happen is change. A change needs to take place. Part of the message of depression is, please stop doing this to me. Please, I cannot carry on doing this, whether it's thinking the same thoughts or being locked in the same cycle of kind of life-defeating behavior, please stop. That's kind of what is going on. It's a signal, it's like a text from your psychologist saying, I can't do this anymore. And so making changes can only be good, can only be beneficial. Now, in the end, there wasn't enough glue holding Thomas Crooks together, not enough glue holding him to himself, not to anyone else. If he had one best friend, that could have made a difference. If he had one confidant, one person that was supporting him, perhaps like Vincent van Gogh had Theo, that could have made a difference. If he had a girlfriend or just a childhood friend that was still there for him, could have made a difference. And that is really an issue that each person needs to sort out themselves. If you don't have someone in your life, you need to find someone. And, what we anchor ourselves to and our symbolic frameworks are only matters we ourselves can attend to. No one can do that for us. Crooks was also said by a former classmate to have been bullied by other classmates. He had been teased for the way he dressed, and with the former classmate noting that he was lonely and often seemed socially reserved. Now, being able to trust others in a situation like that should be a real issue. I mean, if it's not a real issue, then you haven't learned the lesson from how people have treated you. And so you should withdraw. When you've been bullied or manipulated, you should kind of be tentative in terms of trusting other people. But one doesn't have to begin by, reaching out to another person. You can begin by reaching out in other ways. You can, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, many perpetrators of violent crimes who have depression feel invisible. They feel unnoticed by others. And more often than not, they are made out to be a bad person or weird or dangerous. In other words, an identity is foisted upon them, right? And so what is the way out of that? Well, simply the opposite. Find a way to make yourself feel visible, not to the world, but to yourself. Find a way to see yourself as a good person, as a person who has a place in this world, in your society. And there are a lot of places for weird people, for strange people, for unusual people. This feeling of invisibility is very common in our superficial world. It's not only bullied people who feel that way. And this is also why bullying is so painful. At precisely the time when a young person feels a natural urge to engage, to be themselves, to step forward, to move into the world, it is especially painful to be pushed back into themselves, to be poked and prodded, to be harangued, to be told to shut up, until the bullied are forced to shut themselves up in themselves. Their victims, if the trauma is severe enough, may carry lifelong scars. And guess what? These may be invisible to everyone else. And thus, the motive is often to reveal oneself to the world. I'm talking about when these people lash out as shooters. The motive is to reveal oneself to the world on a great stage, gain the attention which they feel they've been deprived of. And it's also a kind of vengeance against the world, a world that has mischaracterized them, from their standpoint. And so, in a very real sense, if you take away the bullying, you take away the destructive act. Take away the humiliation, and you bring back the self-esteem, and the depression fizzles away. And so this is an area that someone out of school, or someone who is emerging into 20s, say, or their 20s, or even later, can take some initiative, and then more and more initiative. I have to say, if you have grown up in a family where your family have made you feel that you don't belong, then how the hell are you going to feel like you belong in the world? So if your family are making you feel that way, you might need to separate yourself from them, or at least recognize that what they are doing isn't very good for you, and then take some initiative, and then more and more initiative. Transplanting, which might be moving to another school, or doing homeschool, or moving away from home as soon as you can. All of these are options to get away from the destructive influence. And that then brings us to my 5 recommendations to what I call finding the glue. 5 tips to resilience that ought to put you on the road back to happiness. Are you ready? Number 1, move. This may be the hardest part, and like a rocket at launch, it burns most of its fuel trying to overcome the entropy holding it where it is. It starts actually with changing your mind, changing your heart and perspective. Think about a rocket launch. The rocket just doesn't, one day the rocket is there and it's fueled. The rocket has to be built. The rocket has to be designed. Someone has a plan for that rocket. There's a dream or an idea that exists in someone's mind. And then eventually the rocket comes to the launch pad. In the same way, you need to have a dream. You need to have an idea. You need to be inspired by something. You need to find fuel. You need to construct something of yourself. You need to put yourself on a platform or a launch pad that's going to get you where you need to go, away from wherever it is you are to begin with. And so, as I said, start actually with changing your mind, changing your heart, and getting a fresh perspective. And within that place, you might feel the rush of new ideas and inspirations and possibilities and opportunities. So do that before anything else can happen. You need to do that. In order to go somewhere else, even psychologically, one has to let go of the anchors and foundations. Just think about when a rocket launches, it's held in place, but those anchors must release for the rocket to be able to go where it needs to go. And certainly there's a risk in that moment. The rocket could fall over. The rocket could be let go in a way that it flies off course. It needs to let go at the right time and in the right way. But for sure, those anchors need to be let go of. The foundations have a role until a certain point. And the function of anchors and foundations are to keep you where you are. Well, a rocket isn't made to stay where it is. A rocket is made to leave, to go somewhere else. And so let me give you another example. In my garden this winter, a delicious monster plant was severely damaged by the winter cold. It's been a very unusually cold winter. And all of its large, beautiful leaves were completely destroyed. All of them turned black and withered. And I was almost certain the plant itself was dead. I was actually very close to just throwing the plant away in the garbage. And instead I clipped off the dead leaves. They'd turned black. And I just put it in a spot on a table. And I gave it some water. And I've waited. And nothing much has happened. But I did move it from where it was to somewhere else. And one thing I did notice was, although the leaves were dead, these great leaves that give it life and give it nourishment, although they had died, its stem was still green and apparently alive. And so after moving it from outside to inside, where it was warmer, and giving it regular water, that's all I did. I was astonished to see small lime green pyramids emerging out of the side of it. That's not really how these leaves are supposed to form. With the delicious monster, the leaves tend to form kind of at the crook of another leaf. That's the natural place for them to form. And so for these leaves to form almost out of the stems of the sort of vegetative matter is actually just showing the will of this plant to live, to make brand new leaves. And so plants kind of have a psychology where they are prepared to have parts of themselves die, because they also have the ability to bring other parts of themselves back online, and they can afford to lose a certain amount of their bodies. And the same applies in a way, certainly psychologically, with human beings. You need to prune away the dead stuff. You need to get rid of it. And then you need to start again, deliberately, intentionally, purposefully. And so just by changing where something is, in this case a plant, just that alone may be enough for it to grow back to life. If you're young and under the authority of your parents and you can't move your home, well, move your body. Move your body anyway. Moving your body where you decide to move not the world. You don't move in reaction. You decide. That is an early way of developing mind over matter and mastery over moods and flagging motivation and self-discipline. Keep working on this. This is the most important area. Number 2, find a role model, some positive source of inspiration. And of course, the better your role model, the more this is the kind of fuel that you need. Now, role models abound. I follow Lucy Charles Barkley, a super tough triathlete, and I'm inspired by Vincent van Gogh's resilience. Despite being rejected by society, he found a way to create something incredible. And so you also need to find your own inspiring anchors. Number 3, reach out. If people don't get you, seriously consider getting a dog or a cat. I'm not joking. Start up a garden. You don't necessarily need to invest in other human beings. You can invest in someone or something else. Or just spend time in nature. Find a park, find somewhere where you can just feel the sunshine, where you can appreciate just the capacities of nature. There's so much we can learn from them. And stop looking inwards or backwards or into yourself the whole time. Look forwards, look outwards, and try to pay attention to life in the world beyond your own life. Try and actively search out for new experiences. Go into places you've never been before. Think about things you haven't thought of before. And that brings us to number 4, start a new project. Whether you take up photography or hiking or art or any creative pursuit, start something that requires consistency and effort. Even fitness, perhaps running a 5K or a 10K, and each and every day add a little effort to that. Happiness is something to do. And a new project might be art. It might be drawing a picture. It might be planting a garden. But it must be something that you are invested in and that you care about, right? Number 5, recognize that constructing an identity is a process. It's actually a lifelong process. If it took time to destroy, it also takes time to create. Constructing an identity requires consciousness and awareness and patience. Read, think, but read new things, think new thoughts. Forget about who you were and decide who you want to be. Of course, you can remember who you were if it's to learn from your mistakes, but don't dwell on it. Remember in a real sense that you already are whoever you decide you are. All that needs to happen next are for your actions and habits to catch up and the world to catch on. Coming back to Crooks, make no mistake, bullies take sadistic pleasure in repeatedly getting one-upmanship over their victims. In a real sense, Crooks was expressing the lesson he had learned. After being bullied day after day, season after season, he wanted the world to experience the same medicine, payback. So we are responsible ultimately for ourselves. Crooks is responsible ultimately for what he did, for who he became. Not someone else, not a politician, not the environment, not life or what happens to us. We are responsible. How we react is our responsibility. If you accept that there is power in your actions, if you can't accept it, your anger will make you poor. And every time you blame someone else, you'll be giving your power away. So in a case like this, yes, the shooter bears the lion's share of responsibility. But having said that, those who knew him, his peers, his co-workers, his family, they also bear very real responsibility. A person's esteem is everyone's responsibility. And we see it on YouTube every day. People trying to undermine one another. Oh, I don't agree with you. I'm going to undermine you. The sum of all that undermining is the world we live in today. What did we say? What can be unburdened by what was.
Now you say from such and such a time you've been going downhill, you've faded away, you've done nothing. Now that being so, what's to be done?
Whatever has happened has happened. Whatever has been lost has been lost. Whatever it cost you, it cost you. and you need to move as quickly as you can. You do need to mourn, you do need to recover, right? But you also need to try not to waste time in getting to that point where you get up and you do the next thing. After all, that's what life is all about. So yes, things have been lost and it wasn't fair. But what are you going to do next? All of that did happen, yes. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do? Because what can be unburdened by what was, right? This thing that you can do can be, but only if it's unburdened by what it was. Just like a rocket, it can be if it's unburdened by the gravity and everything else that's kind of in place. It needs to burst forth into the future, unburdened by the past, that place that it was anchored to. So the last thing I want to say is, if you do find your way back to resilience, try to be part of paying it forward as well. Try to be part of encouraging, recognizing, and defending others, the vulnerable, the weak, the picked on, the injustice that's in the world. Imagine if instead of invalidating people for the things we don't like, we found good things about them to encourage. Which approach would you say leads to a better world? Which approach leads to a world worth living in? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.